Okay, so we talked about the pharmacokinetics of penicillin. Now we're going to talk about some precautions. So typically we think of penicillins as being pretty safe drugs. The exceptions are when we have allergic reactions. Typically they are hypersensitivity reactions. And these can range from just a very mild kind of skin reaction to full-blown anaphylactic shock. Once an animal is known to be sensitive to any penicillin, we consider them to be allergic to all penicillins, and we want to put that in their chart. And we don't want to give them any in this class of drugs. So this is our poster child for that type of reaction. I should say this is our poster child for vaccines. Dachshunds tend to be very reactive to vaccines for some reason. And but this is what you see in the mild signs of a reaction, and that is the skin rash typically shows up as swelling. So this little dog's face is swollen around the eyes and the nose, and owners, especially with short-haired dachshunds, pick up on it pretty quickly. Even the long hairs, because the face has short hair, they'll pick up on it. But that is the first sign that you usually see. Sometimes an animal will vomit before this skin reaction occurs as they're sensitive to it. Um, and then, but maybe they won't vomit and they get home and the owner sees something like this, either after administration of a penicillin or from a vaccine reaction. If the skin rash is itchy, they'll go after that sometimes. So it's just important to know that there is cross-reactivity. So once an animal has experienced a reaction like this, we note it in their chart and we definitely mark them as not to receive penicillins. Um, the other thing that can happen is in some animals and some species, penicillins will destroy beneficial gastrointestinal tract. That's what my acronym is, GIT, gastrointestinal tract bacteria. And that allows other types of bacteria to proliferate that may cause severe diarrhea, life-threatening diarrhea, where the animal loses too much fluid, the inside of the mucosal layer of the GI tract starts to break down, um, and then the animal cannot absorb anything. So there are some species that we do not give this in, and that is guinea pigs, hamsters, rabbits, any of the exotic small pets. You definitely want to check and make sure that they can handle a penicillin before giving it to them. Um, because it's the end of the year, I had students watch this little video in class. You can watch it on your own. It is, you may have seen it before, it is an amazing video on how much a hamster can carry in those cheek pouches. So anyway, enjoy. Doesn't have anything to do with pharmacology except how much an animal can eat. We need to be careful with these drugs in food animals. They can get them over the counter. So it's not illegal in this state to treat your animals with certain antibiotics. There are, feed stores that will sell some of these drugs. The thing that has happened, and it happened in the last year, so this is pretty recent, is the Veterinary Feed Directive for human medically important drugs. And these drugs are, because they are considered important in the human world and we don't want to create resistance, they are controlled. Some of them we cannot give in any species. The big thing that had happened with antibiotics in production animals is animals have been fed uh, antibiotics as part of their feed because it seems to increase growth. So with certain antibiotics, and now producers have to get a veterinarian prescription in order to get feed that has antibiotics in it. So that's kind of a change now, and it's been an interesting thing in veterinary conferences, what's come up is a lot of conversation about bees because bees are food animals and they've kind of been ignored. And certain diseases are treated with antibiotics, and now honey producers have to get um, a veterinarian's prescription in order to get certain drugs in order to treat them. So, interesting little side note, but the thing to know is that these directives have come down recently, and it used to be more, uh, these drugs were very readily available, and that's becoming less and less so. And withdrawal times are very important when we're looking at any types of antibiotics in food animals. So each penicillin type has its own spectrum that it is effective against. There can be cross resistance. So if a bacterium becomes resistant to one type of penicillin, it may have resistance to other types. Most gram-negative bacteria are resistant because of that outer coating just does not let the the antibiotic in. So penicillins aren't used typically with gram-negative types of infections, with some exceptions. So something that is interesting about penicillin is it has this structure. So I'm talking about the antibiotic right now. Antibiotic has a structure called a beta-lactam ring. So you can see this ring structure here. And the reason it's important is that some bacteria have enzymes. So here we go with our ACEs against this ring. And the bacteria that have these enzymes, the enzymes are called penicillinases or beta-lactamases. They target the beta-lactam ring and make the penicillin ineffective. I'm emphasizing this because I've had some students confuse this beta-lactam ring thinking it's in the bacteria. It's in the penicillin, and the bacteria has enzymes that can act on it and make it ineffective against them. So some staph bacteria have this ability to produce these enzymes. And then we're going to talk about cephalosporins next. That's another type of antibiotic, and they also have these beta-lactam rings. So what we've done is we've created what are called potentiated penicillins. These are any types of potentiated drugs or drugs that have been made more effective. That's basically what potentiated means. We add another drug to them and it makes them resistant to that penicillinase. So Clavamox, if you've heard of that drug, that is a potentiated penicillin. So what happens with Clavamox is clavulanic acid and sulbactam have been added to it. They both have a beta-lactam ring structure similarly to the amoxicillin that's in Clavamox. And what happens is the bacteria tend to attack those beta-lactam rings and leave the amoxicillin alone so that it can act. So that is our way around some of this resistance from those enzymes that the bacteria produce. Something that's important to note about Clavamox in particular is that it is packaged specially. So we have, this is a liquid that gets made up uh, and given to usually cats or small dogs. And then this is a box that has a, a bunch of these foil wrapped sleeves. So I don't know, you all may not have experienced fizzies or I'm trying to think like Alka-Seltzer. um, it's just a kind of a flat way of packaging a group of tablets, and each tablet is encased in the foil, and you cut open a little blister that has the tablet in it. But when something is packaged that way, it's packaged that way for a reason. So we always want to look at our packaging. And typically you'll reach for these in weeks. You pull out one of those kind of sleeves of the foil is a week's worth. And the owner needs to just cut open each blister and take the tablet out, and you cannot cut those tablets in half. So they provide them in a pretty good variety um, of milligrams to select from. But we can't cut them in half because they're packaged that way because they're sensitive to air. Just something to note about Clavamox. So penicillin G is a natural penicillin and derived directly from the fungal mold. And it is only injectable. Remember the G, and gastric acid will inactivate it, so we can't give it orally. So it comes in several forms, and the forms relate to how long of an activity this drug has. Um, so those that are combined with sodium or potassium have reached a great peak concentration. So really great when we have something that needs an infection that needs to get a high concentration of the penicillin in there. It can be given IV, sub-Q, or IM, but it doesn't act that long. So we're stuck with giving injections twice a day or daily. Procaine, when we add procaine to penicillin, that makes it so that we can't give it IV. Procaine cannot go IV, and it is a local anesthetic, and so in the horse racing world, we can't give this drug within a certain time frame of racing because it could lower or increase the pain threshold for horses, and so it's not allowed around racing time. But the advantage of it is that we can give it either sub-Q or IM, and it will delay the absorption from the IM sites in particular so that we would only have to give it every other day. So that's a big advantage in typically these are large animals that we're giving these drugs to. Benzathine actually makes the action even longer. It's active up to 5 days, and it has the same routes as the procaine penicillin, sub-Q or IM. So big advantage in only having to give the drug infrequently, but that also will increase the withdrawal time. Ampicillin is a type of penicillin that we do have in oral forms. It's not used orally for systemic infections. It's used to treat things that are in the GI tract because it's not absorbed. It treats things that need to be treated in the gastrointestinal system for the oral forms. This form of penicillin has more gram-negative activity than some other forms, so it can be used for those types of infections, but again, only used we use it injectable for systemic. If it's given orally, we're treating something in the gastrointestinal system. Amoxicillin was what I talked about when I talked about Clavamox. So it is well absorbed orally, and you can read these things. We typically combine it with the sulbactam and clavulanic acid to make it resistant against beta-lactamase enzymes. And there are a lot of generic amoxicillins. It's been around a long time. But the approved veterinary product is Clavamox, and it is the better product to use if we're going to use an amoxicillin. You may have heard of the drug Augmentin. It's the very same drug. It's just the one that is used in humans. So lastly, we have naturally resistant to beta-lactamase types of penicillins, cloxacillin, dicloxacillin, oxacillin, methicillin. We use these for very specific sorts of infections because it has a pretty narrow spectrum of activity. We'll use it for staph pyoderma, such as what's on this critter's back, osteomyelitis, mastitis. You may have heard of methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. So methicillin, this is the penicillin that the Staph aureus is resistant to. This is a skin infection that tends to survive in hospitals, and it has become resistant to methicillin, which was kind of the last in the line of defense of penicillins. So we don't use penicillin to treat it anymore. That's what that infection is named after.